En pie.
You
Bien, buenas tardes. Vamos a dar comienzo al acto de investidura de la doctora Honoris Causa por la Universidad de Málaga, la profesora Andrea Goldsmith. Tiene la palabra el señor director de la Escuela Técnica Superior de Ingeniería de Telecomunicación para dar lectura en representación de la misma a la propuesta de nombramiento de doctora Honoris Causa de la Universidad de Málaga a la profesora Goldsmith.
Con la venia, señor rector, la Junta de la Escuela Técnica Superior de Ingeniería de Telecomunicación de la Universidad de Málaga, reunida en sesión ordinaria el día 2 de febrero de 2022, acuerda aprobar la propuesta de nombramiento como doctor honoris causa de la Universidad de Málaga a doña Andrea Goldsmith, en reconocimiento a su destacada contribución a la investigación y la innovación en el ámbito de las tecnologías de la información y las comunicaciones, así como su lucha incansable por el fomento de la diversidad, la inclusión y los valores éticos en la ingeniería. Primera ganadora del Premio Marconi, ha sido fundadora de empresas tecnológicas de éxito, es autora de una treintena de patentes y miembro del Salón de la Fama de los Inventores de Estados Unidos, fundadora del Comité de Diversidad, Inclusión y Ética de la Junta Directiva del IECubo y actual decana de Ingeniería y Ciencias Aplicadas de la Universidad de Princeton. Sus presentes y pasados estudiantes insistirían en que este reconocimiento sea también por ser una gran profesora. La propuesta se aprueba por asentimiento de la Junta.
Muchísimas gracias, profesor Godoy. Tiene la palabra la señora secretaria general para dar lectura del acuerdo del Consejo de Gobierno de la Universidad de Málaga por el que se concede el nombramiento de doctora honoris causa a la profesora Andrea Goldsmith.
Con la venia. Certificación del acuerdo de nombramiento como doctor honoris causa de la Universidad de Málaga de doña Andrea Goldsmith. La disposición adicional tercera del Real Decreto 99/2011 de 28 de enero, por el que se regulan las enseñanzas oficiales de doctorado, modificado por el Real Decreto 576/2023 de 4 de julio, establece: de acuerdo con lo que establezca su normativa, las universidades podrán nombrar doctor o doctora honoris causa a aquellas personas que, en atención a sus excepcionales méritos académicos, científicos, culturales, sociales o específicamente personales, sean acreedoras de tal distinción. En aplicación de esta disposición, los estatutos de la Universidad de Málaga, aprobados por Decreto 464/2019 de 14 de mayo de la Junta de Andalucía, atribuyen al Consejo de Gobierno de la Universidad la competencia para acordar el nombramiento de doctores o doctoras honoris causa a propuesta de la respectiva Junta de Facultad o Escuela, que deberá ser informada por el claustro universitario. En virtud de todo lo cual, y en cumplimiento de las citadas previsiones legales, certifico que, a propuesta de la Junta de Centro de la Escuela Técnica Superior de Ingeniería de Telecomunicación, formalizada el 2 de febrero de 2022, previo informe favorable del claustro de la Universidad de Málaga, emitido el día 19 de diciembre de 2022, el Consejo de Gobierno de la Universidad de Málaga acordó el nombramiento de doña Andrea Goldsmith como doctora honoris causa de esta universidad el día 7 de marzo de 2023. De todo lo cual doy fe como secretaria general de esta universidad en Málaga a 29 de octubre de 2024.
Alzaos y cubríos. La secretaria general, el director de la escuela, el padrino y los demás doctores de la Escuela Técnica Superior de Ingeniería de Telecomunicación se sirvan a acompañar a la profesora Andrea Goldsmith, que va a ser investida doctora honoris causa de la Universidad de Málaga. Sentaos y descubríos. Se concede la palabra al profesor doctor Juan Manuel Romero Jerez para proceder a la lectura de la laudatio de la candidata profesora Andrea Goldsmith.
Rector magnífico, excelentísimas e ilustrísimas autoridades, queridos compañeros, compañeras y estudiantes, señoras y señores, querida Andrea. Es un honor tener la oportunidad de exponer la trayectoria y los méritos de la profesora Andrea Goldsmith para recibir el Doctorado Honoris Causa por la Universidad de Málaga, acordado por el Consejo de Gobierno a propuesta de la Escuela Técnica Superior de Ingeniería de Telecomunicación. Me unen con Andrea una estrecha amistad y el amor por la ciencia y la tecnología, así como por la universidad. Incluso compartimos algunas publicaciones, pero me temo que las similitudes terminan aquí. Sus méritos docentes, de investigación, innovación e industriales y la cantidad ingente de premios y reconocimientos resultan abrumadores, hasta el punto de que resulta difícil glosarlos sin parecer hiperbólico, por lo que necesariamente habré de ceñirme a los aspectos más relevantes de su trayectoria, tarea a la que me dedicaré en los siguientes minutos, no sin cierto rubor, pues si lo que voy a presentar es lo que se considera un currículum, no sabría cómo catalogar a lo que suelo enviar cuando me solicitan mi propio historial académico. Andrea Goldsmith es catedrática de universidad, científica, emprendedora, inventora, tecnóloga, pionera y líder mundial en el ámbito de la ingeniería de comunicaciones móviles e inalámbricas, tanto en sus aspectos teóricos como prácticos. Sus ideas e innovaciones en este campo se han traducido en mejoras de velocidad y rendimiento de las que se han beneficiado miles de millones de usuarios de redes celulares móviles, así como de redes inalámbricas de área local, como son las conocidas redes Wi-Fi o Wi-Fi. No obstante, sus intereses de investigación son aún más amplios e incluyen los ámbitos de la ingeniería de control y el procesado de señal de sistemas ciberfísicos, con aplicaciones en dispositivos biomédicos y neurociencia, ámbitos en los que también cuenta con contribuciones reseñables. La profesora Goldsmith obtuvo los títulos de grado y máster en Ingeniería Eléctrica en la Universidad de Berkeley, California, Estados Unidos, universidad donde también se doctoró en 1994 con una tesis doctoral que ha tenido una amplia repercusión. Posteriormente, tras pasar varios años trabajando en radiocomunicaciones en empresas de Silicon Valley, California, fue profesora en el Instituto Tecnológico de California, Caltech, desde donde en 1999 pasa a la Universidad de Stanford, una de las más prestigiosas universidades del mundo, donde en 2007 alcanza la cátedra de Ingeniería Eléctrica, puesto que ocupa hasta el año 2020. Desde entonces es decana de Ingeniería y Ciencias Aplicadas de la Universidad de Princeton, ostentando la cátedra Arthur Lee Grandotti de Ingeniería Eléctrica y de Computación. Es, asimismo, directora del Laboratorio de Sistemas Inalámbricos, en la que se han formado 26 estudiantes de doctorado y por donde han pasado decenas de investigadores postdoctorales e invitados de todas las partes del mundo. algunos de ellos procedentes de la Universidad de Málaga. Tan solo unos breves datos pueden darnos una primera idea, si bien todavía algo superficial, aunque rotunda, de su excelencia académica y profesional. Según el portal académico Google Scholar, tiene un índice H de 101 y cuenta además con 29 patentes. La profesora Goldsmith ha llevado a cabo avances fundamentales en los campos de la teoría de la información y la comunicación, siendo pionera en la tecnología de modulación adaptativa en sistemas de comunicaciones móviles. Una de las características del canal radioeléctrico es que las condiciones de propagación son muy diversas en función del entorno físico en que nos encontremos, además de ser variantes en el tiempo. La existencia de distintos niveles de interferencia, a menudo incontrolables, y el hecho de que los usuarios móviles, por definición, pueden desplazarse, incluso a velocidades muy altas, hace que si se transmite información a un ritmo constante, las fluctuaciones del canal radio den lugar a problemas en la comunicación, que incluyen retardos, llamadas caídas y pérdidas de datos. Las contribuciones de la profesora Goldsmith permiten adaptar el flujo de transmisión de datos de manera que se obtengan las mejores prestaciones que permite el canal radio en cada momento. Sus enfoques para aumentar la capacidad, la velocidad y el alcance de los sistemas inalámbricos se han convertido en la base para gestionar las condiciones dinámicas de las redes modernas. Asimismo, la profesora Goldsmith ha hecho importantes aportaciones a nuestra comprensión de la tecnología de múltiples antenas, contribuyendo al establecimiento de sus límites teóricos y haciendo propuestas de implementación práctica que ahora se utilizan de forma rutinaria en las redes Wi-Fi y en las redes celulares de quinta generación conocidas como 5G y que permiten multiplicar la velocidad de transmisión de datos, eliminar interferencias y suavizar las fluctuaciones del canal radio. En definitiva, el trabajo de la profesora Goldsmith ha contribuido significativamente a dar forma a las tecnologías de comunicaciones actuales, que emplean como soporte el canal radioeléctrico, estableciendo reglas básicas para el rendimiento de las redes móviles e inalámbricas. Todos estos avances e innovaciones han sido el resultado del liderazgo científico de Andrea Goldsmith, que se manifiesta en el hecho de haber sido investigadora principal de multitud de proyectos de investigación, varios de ellos implicando a múltiples universidades, financiados con decenas de millones de dólares por entidades públicas de Estados Unidos como NSF o DARPA, entre otras, y también privadas, entre las que se encuentran Huawei, Intel o Toyota, solo por citar algunos ejemplos. La investigación en ingeniería en cualquiera de sus ramas debe estar enfocada en la búsqueda de soluciones a necesidades y problemas de índole práctico, así como a la invención de nuevos sistemas, equipos y herramientas. En la investigación llevada a cabo por la profesora Goldsmith pueden diferenciarse tres etapas o fases. En una primera fase, los esquemas de comunicaciones propuestos fueron formulados teóricamente y sus prestaciones fueron demostradas formalmente haciendo uso de sofisticadas herramientas matemáticas. En una segunda fase, la propia profesora ha puesto en práctica sus ideas, fundando exitosas empresas donde se han implementado sus propuestas teóricas, teniendo que hacer frente y resolver los numerosos problemas de orden práctico que no aparecen por sus inimitables simplificaciones en las formulaciones teóricas. Finalmente, la tercera fase trasciende a la propia Andrea, pues consiste en que algunas de las soluciones propuestas han sido adoptadas por la práctica totalidad de la industria de telecomunicaciones. En este sentido, quiero hacer ahora mención a la faceta de Andrea Goldsmith como emprendedora, cuyos éxitos van en paralelo a los de su carrera académica. Así, en 2005 fundó Coantena, empresa que fue pionera en la implementación de circuitos integrados para la distribución de vídeo en el hogar a través de las redes Wi-Fi, haciendo uso de múltiples antenas, tanto en transmisión como en recepción, conocidos como sistemas MIMO o MIMO, por sus siglas en inglés. Lo que hasta ese momento nadie creía que fuera posible. Dicha empresa se hizo pública en el mercado bursátil, siendo adquirida en 2019 por la empresa ON Semiconductor, teniendo en ese momento un valor de mercado de alrededor de $1.000 millones. Añadidamente, en 2010, fundó Accelera, renombrada más tarde como Plum Wi-Fi, que ha producido los primeros servicios Wi-Fi domésticos autooptimizados del mundo. Además de esto, la profesora Goldsmith ha asesorado a numerosas empresas de base tecnológica y actualmente forma parte de la junta directiva de las compañías Intel, Medtronic y Crown Castle. Esta exitosa trayectoria la ha hecho merecedora de muy numerosos reconocimientos, siendo invitada a formar parte de algunas de las más prestigiosas instituciones científicas del mundo. De este modo, es miembro de las estadounidenses Academia Nacional de Ingeniería y la Academia de Artes y Ciencias, así como de la británica Real Academia de Ingeniería. Es doctora honoris causa por la Universidad de Edimburgo y desde 2024 forma parte del Salón de la Fama de Inventores Nacionales de Estados Unidos, entre otras numerosas distinciones. También forma parte desde 2021 del Consejo Presidencial de Asesores en Ciencia y Tecnología, organismo que tiene como encargo el asesorar y hacer recomendaciones de políticas de ciencia, tecnología e innovación a la Presidencia de Estados Unidos. La lista de premios y galardones que diversas instituciones científicas y técnicas han otorgado a la profesora Goldsmith por su meritoria carrera pueden catalogarse como deslumbrante, abarcando todos los ámbitos de su actividad. De entre ellos, debemos resaltar por su importancia el Premio Marconi, la más alta distinción que es posible recibir en el ámbito de las telecomunicaciones. Cito, por sus contribuciones pioneras a la teoría y la práctica de las comunicaciones inalámbricas adaptativas. Fin de la cita. Dicho premio le fue otorgado en 2020, siendo la primera mujer en recibirlo. En palabras del presidente de la sociedad Marconi, cito, Andrea ha permitido que miles de millones de consumidores en todo el mundo disfruten de un servicio inalámbrico rápido y confiable, así como de aplicaciones como transmisión de vídeo y vehículos autónomos que requieren de un rendimiento de red estable. Fin de la cita. Andrea Goldsmith es esencialmente una profesora universitaria y ha llevado a cabo también una muy meritoria actividad docente. Su dedicación en este ámbito queda reflejada en su libro de texto titulado Wireless Communications, que proporciona una comprensión integral de los principios fundamentales que subyacen a las comunicaciones inalámbricas y que ha sido empleado por miles de estudiantes y profesionales en todo el mundo, como demuestran sus más de 17.000 citas en Google Scholar. Es, además, coautora de otros 3 libros, MIMO Wireless Communications, centrado en esquemas de múltiples antenas, Principles of Cognitive Radio, donde se abordan técnicas de eficiencia del espectro radioeléctrico, y Machine Learning and Wireless Communications, donde se estudia la aplicación de diversas técnicas de inteligencia artificial en los sistemas de radiocomunicaciones. También en este contexto docente, la profesora Goldsmith ha dedicado gran parte de su carrera a mejorar la experiencia de los estudiantes de grado y máster y a la orientación y mecenazgo de sus estudiantes de doctorado, incluso mucho después de que obtengan el título, siendo numerosos los casos en los que estos se han convertido en renombrados académicos y profesionales. El impulso a los estudiantes queda patente en el establecimiento de comités de estudiantes y de premios a jóvenes investigadores en el seno del Instituto de Ingenieros Eléctricos y Electrónicos, conocido como IE-Cubo por sus siglas en inglés, siendo esta la mayor asociación profesional del mundo, con más de 400.000 miembros en 160 países. Esta actividad centrada en los estudiantes la ha hecho merecedora también de diversos premios y reconocimientos, del que me gustaría destacar el último, otorgado en este 2024, la Medalla de Educación Mulligan, de IE-Cubo, tras cuya recepción ha manifestado, cito, «No puedo imaginar un premio más significativo para mí que este, ya que educar, orientar e inspirar a la próxima generación de ingenieros ha sido el más gratificante de todos mis esfuerzos profesionales. Fin de la cita. Por otra parte, nos parece también muy destacable y digno de mención el compromiso con las instituciones de las que ha formado y forma parte, llevando a cabo numerosas tareas que son raramente mencionadas en una laudatio como la que nos ocupa, pero que dan muestra de su implicación con la universidad y que son fundamentales para la operativa de esta institución. Así, durante su etapa en la Universidad de Stanford, ha presidido el Senado de dicha universidad, equivalente a nuestro claustro, ha sido miembro claustral durante múltiples periodos, ha formado parte de la Junta Asesora del Consejo Académico, el Grupo de Presupuesto, el Comité de Investigación, el Comité de Política Normativa y Planificación, la Comisión de Formación de Grado y Posgrado, la Junta Directiva del Foro de Mujeres Docentes y el Grupo de Trabajo sobre Mujeres y Liderazgo, entre otros puestos. Asimismo, desde su actual puesto de decana de Ingeniería de Ciencias Aplicadas de la Universidad de Princeton, ha liderado la mayor y más rápida expansión de profesores y estudiantes de posgrado. Ha aumentado la financiación en investigación en un 20% e implementado políticas de buenas prácticas para la contratación de personal. Precisamente un aspecto insoslayable en la trayectoria de Andrea Goldsmith como profesora científica e ingeniera es la dimensión social desarrollada durante toda su carrera, centrada fundamentalmente en el apoyo y soporte a las mujeres y a las minorías. En este sentido, en el seno de IECubo ha fundado y presidido el Comité de Diversidad e Inclusión y bajo su liderazgo el IECubo adoptó su primera declaración de diversidad y ha otorgado a 5 mujeres su más alta distinción, la medalla IECubo. También, tanto en Stanford como en Princeton, ha liderado iniciativas para mejorar el reclutamiento, la retención y el apoyo de las profesoras. Además, ha creado premios para reconocer los logros destacados de las mujeres que inician su carrera profesional. La profesora Goldsmith ha sido ampliamente reconocida por su trabajo para hacer que la ingeniería y la ciencia sean más diversas e inclusivas, tanto en entornos académicos como industriales, habiendo, de nuevo, recibido diversos premios por esta faceta de su trayectoria. Precisamente, el premio Marconi, antes mencionado, reconoce, cito, el liderazgo para mejorar radicalmente la diversidad y la inclusión en la ingeniería, que ha cambiado tanto la experiencia del consumidor como la profesión. Fin de la cita. La profesora Goldsmith ve la tecnología como una manera de beneficiar a la humanidad, tal y como ella misma ha manifestado recientemente al ser incluida en el Salón de la Fama de Inventores. Cito, por eso me hice ingeniera, para diseñar tecnología que haga del mundo un lugar mejor. Fin de la cita. A título personal, puedo dar fe del compromiso y dedicación de Andrea Goldsmith para con sus estudiantes, compañeros y colegas, que van mucho más allá de cualquier premio o reconocimiento y no quedan recogidos en un currículum al uso, pero son una muestra de su talla humana. La relación de Andrea Goldsmith con la Universidad de Málaga cuenta ya con 2 décadas de historia. Comienza de manera casi casual en 2004, cuando de manera descoordinada diversos profesores de la Universidad de Málaga, entonces doctores noveles, contactamos con ellas por correo electrónico para tratar de iniciar una colaboración científica, dado el prestigio que ya entonces tenía. Para sorpresa propia y pasmo de extraños, pues Andrea recibe correos de este tipo casi a diario, dicha colaboración se hace efectiva, comenzando con una primera estancia de investigación de 1 mes de la propia Andrea en nuestra universidad, en 2005, seguida de sucesivas estancias de investigación de hasta 4 miembros de nuestra universidad en su laboratorio, siendo una de ellas una estancia postdoctoral de 2 años de duración. Esta colaboración ha dado frutos notables, pues se han publicado conjuntamente 11 artículos de investigación en revistas de muy alto índice de impacto y 16 contribuciones a los mejores congresos internacionales que son de primer nivel, implicando a 8 miembros de la Universidad de Málaga de 3 departamentos distintos: Ingeniería de Comunicaciones, Tecnología Electrónica y Matemática Aplicada. Estas publicaciones han sido citadas globalmente más de 800 veces, habiéndose publicado en 2022 el último trabajo conjunto. No menos destacable ha sido el apoyo explícito de Andrea durante todos estos años a numerosos proyectos de investigación de convocatorias nacionales y autonómicas, solicitados y, por cierto, concedidos desde la Universidad de Málaga. No quedaría completa una semblanza de Andrea sin trazar algunos rasgos de su personalidad. Andrea es una persona cercana, con un gran sentido del humor y extremadamente generosa. Su inmensa capacidad de trabajo va en paralelo a su capacidad de disfrutar de la vida, sus amigos y su familia. Andrea te abre las puertas de su casa y te permite disfrutar junto a los suyos de momentos inolvidables. Somos varios profesores de la Universidad de Málaga y de otras universidades españolas quienes podemos presumir de su cariño y amistad. Andrea es muy capaz de coger un avión desde París para asistir a la boda de uno de nuestros compañeros, o de, si sus avatares profesionales la traen a España, pasarse por Málaga unas horas para tomar un café o cenar. Gracias, Andrea, por mantener la amistad, incluso después de caer, parece que lo han entrecomillado, a las frías aguas del Lake Tahoe, si bien hay quien afirma que simplemente tropezó. No así el resto de los atónitos y aterrados presentes. Me gustaría felicitar a Andrea por el día de hoy y por toda su inigualable carrera, y extender mi felicitación a su familia, en especial a su entrañable y querido marido Arturo Sanz, también un reconocido científico e ingeniero, y en palabras de la propia Andrea, sus mejores resultados, sus hijos Daniel y Nicole. En definitiva, en atención a todo lo expuesto, en nombre de la Escuela de Ingeniería de Telecomunicación, solicito encarecidamente le sea concedido a la profesora Andrea Goldsmith el supremo grado de Doctora Honoris Causa por la Universidad de Málaga. Muchas gracias.
Alzaos y cubríos. Se va a proceder a la solemne investidura de doctora honoris causa de la profesora Andrea Goldsmith. Por el Consejo de Gobierno, previo informe del claustro de la Universidad de Málaga, a propuesta de la Escuela Técnica Superior de Ingeniería de Telecomunicación y en testimonio del reconocimiento de vuestros relevantes méritos, habéis sido nombrada doctora honoris causa de la Universidad de Málaga. En virtud de la autoridad que me ha sido conferida por las leyes del reino, os entrego dicho título y la medalla doctoral. Os impongo como símbolo el birrete laureado, antiquísimo y venerado distintivo del magisterio, llevadlo sobre vuestra cabeza como la corona de vuestros estudios y merecimientos. Recibid el libro de la ciencia que os cumple enseñar, y que sea para vos significación y aviso de que por grande que vuestro ingenio fuere, debéis rendir acatamiento y veneración a la doctrina de vuestros maestros y predecesores. Recibid el anillo que la antigüedad entregaba en esta venerada ceremonia como emblema del privilegio de firmar y sellar los dictámenes, consultas y censuras de vuestra ciencia y profesión. No me atrevo a empujar mucho. Así como los guantes blancos, símbolo de la pureza que deben conservar vuestras manos, uno y otro, signos también de la distinción de vuestra categoría. Y finalmente, porque os habéis incorporado a esta universidad, recibid en nombre del claustro el abrazo de fraternidad que quienes se honran y congratulan de ser vuestros hermanos y compañeros. Invito a la nueva doctora Honoris Causa, doña Andrea Goldsmith, a prestar promesa de fidelidad.
Policiore me maxima diligentia, fideaque honestate monere functurum, quo discipulorum proventum universitatis honorum possim agere.
Sentaos y descubríos. Tiene la palabra nuestra magnífica nueva doctora honoris causa, profesora Andrea Goldsmith.
Estimados colegas, amigos, distinguidos invitados y líderes de la Universidad de Málaga, me siento muy honrada de recibir este prestigioso honoris causa de esta gran universidad y esta ciudad mágica. Yo voy a hacer mi dicho en inglés, lo siento que no puedo hablar tan bien español, pero voy a terminar en español al fin para decir las palabras de mi corazón por ese honor. Pues cambio a inglés. This will be reflections on many of the things that Juan Romero talked about, my journey of creating wireless technology, innovation, leadership, and diversity. So I'm going to tell a bit of the informal story about me, different from what Juan Romero told you. I started life as the child of an engineering dad. My dad was a professor of mechanical engineering at UC Berkeley, and my mom was an artist for the Bullwinkle and Rocky show. If some people in the audience remember, she was the model for Natasha Fatale. And I like to say that I got my inspiration as an engineer from my dad, the engineer, serious mechanical engineering professor, and my mom, the very creative artist. I studied at UC Berkeley in the early 80s, and I almost dropped out of engineering because there were very few women, and I was not doing very well in my first year. And that was a good lesson in persevering and pursuing a career, even when many people around me didn't think that I had the capacity or qualifications to be an engineer. When I finished my undergraduate degree, I didn't know what I wanted to do next, so I went to work in Silicon Valley. This is Silicon Valley in the 1980s, very different from the way it is today. And I was very lucky to work in a company that was doing defense communications. There was no commercial wireless. Cellular phones had not been invented yet. Wi-Fi was a decade away, so I was working on defense communications. And I fell in love with wireless communication. I found it magical. And I imagined how it might be impactful, how it might benefit humanity if we could make wireless communication possible for everyone. This was the very beginning of the wireless revolution. And in 1989, I decided I didn't know enough to contribute to wireless technology in the way that I wanted to. So I went back to Berkeley to get my PhD. I was rejected from Stanford University. So I like to say that rejection is a good thing. It just means you take a different path. And if you are rejected from a university, you may end up teaching there many years later, as I did with Stanford. So I went back originally just for my master's degree, and I started working on wireless communication, and I loved it so much I decided to stay for a PhD. I spent several summers at AT&T Bell Laboratories in New Jersey, and there I was working with some of the most brilliant innovators in wireless communication. And I also met my first mentor, in addition to my PhD advisor, Larry Greenstein. So I was very much influenced by the work I was doing as a summer student at Bell Labs. When I finished my PhD in 1994, I looked at working in industry or go back to Bell Labs or university, and I decided to take a job at Caltech as a professor. That was my first professorial job. And then in 1999, I moved to Stanford University, where I spent 21 years on the faculty. In fact, I retired from there, so I may look young, but I'm actually much older than I look. I'm a retired professor from Stanford. And I moved to Princeton in 2020 to become the Dean of Engineering, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. I founded 2 wireless companies when I was at Stanford, Quantenna and Plume Wi-Fi. I'm on the corporate boards of Medtronic and Intel and Crown Castle. I'll talk about that as well. I do a lot of work around diversity in STEM. Actually, I did my animation too fast. As Juan said, my best results are my children, Daniel and Nicole, who are both engineers. And my co-author on my children is my wonderful husband, Arturo, and I will talk about him a little bit later as well. So, most of my career I spent as a faculty member in the university. It's an amazing job for all of you out there that are professors. We know it's such an amazing career. We have lots of freedom to work on whatever problems inspire us. We have amazing colleagues who, like us, are there to work on things that we love, to advance knowledge, to teach the next generation of students. The students and the postdocs, I've had about 50, including some in this room, are the best part of being a professor. They teach me so much more than I can teach them. And it's really the best part of my job, every role that I've had, to work with amazing students and postdocs and collaborators. And watching your students grow up from the day they come in as freshmen, they don't know anything, they don't know what they want to study, and if you're lucky, you inspire them to work in the area that you love, and then they go on to successful careers. There's nothing more satisfying than mentoring young people and seeing them succeed. Teaching is a lot of work, but also a lot of fun. Mentoring is amazing. I continue to get so much joy out of my PhD students and the younger students, the freshmen and sophomores that I've advised, who I'm still in touch with. I just saw my first PhD student a couple weeks ago, and it's the same feeling as when he first walked in my door to work with me. It's so much joy to supervise students. And the other wonderful thing as a faculty member, at least in the United States, where I've been fortunate enough to work, is there's many opportunities beyond just research and teaching. So when I was at Stanford, I was very involved in the entire university, not just focused on my own research. I was involved in setting the university budget, the $6.5 billion university budget for Stanford. I was elected chair of the Faculty Senate, which helped to set the policies throughout the university. I worked on women in leadership through a task force, and I also did work on refining the undergraduate and graduate curriculum for all students, not just in engineering. And I think that was part of the seed of what eventually took me to Princeton, is that the best engineers don't just study engineering. When I was an undergraduate, I studied political science. I almost majored in political science. I studied languages, but not Spanish. Spanish I studied much later, after I met my husband and wanted to talk with his family and raise our children bilingual. I studied philosophy. I studied history, ancient Greek mythology. And all of those things that I studied helped give me a very broad perspective that made me a better engineer and a better leader. And I think as educators, we need to make sure that our students, no matter what they are focused on, get a broad education so that they can bring a broad perspective to whatever it is that they end up working on. So in addition to my work across the university at Stanford, I also was involved in industry. As Juan mentioned, I founded 2 startup companies, Quantenna and Plume Wi-Fi, and I'll talk about Quantenna in a moment. I also got involved in technical companies as a technical advisor. I served on the technical board of advisors for InterDigital and for Sequens, a French company, and for Cohere Communication. And somewhat later, towards the end of my time at Stanford, I was fortunate enough to get invited to join the board of directors of Crown Castle, which is a cell phone tower company. There's very few academics that serve on corporate boards, because most corporations think academics know nothing about business. And that's kind of true, actually, especially engineering academics. But I learned a lot working on the board of Crown Castle about economics and business and how to make a company successful and how to ward off challenges, activist investors, downturns in the economy. That also gave me a very broad perspective. Then I was fortunate to be invited to join the board of Medtronic, which is the largest medical technology company in the world. That's been inspirational to work on technologies that save lives and cure pain and extend life. And then recently, I joined the board of Intel. Anyone heard of Intel? It's a well-known company. It's been in the news a lot lately. It's been a very challenging time for Intel, and that's also been very rewarding to help take a company that really was the foundation of Silicon Valley through probably the roughest period of its history. As Juan mentioned, I'm very involved in my professional society, the IEEE, primarily focused on increasing diversity and inclusion in the IEEE and in the profession, and I'll talk about that at the end of my talk. And I've also served recently on Biden's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. The first committee I served on there was how to revitalize the semiconductor ecosystem in the United States. And more recently, I've been working on a committee to develop a national strategy for the United States to invest in basic research to ensure that the US continues to lead in innovation and technology. It's a whole different world when you work within Washington and meeting the President of the United States multiple times, who is very engaged in this committee. The first meeting that we had with him, he kept the President of the Ukraine waiting 45 minutes because he wanted to talk to us about artificial intelligence. So it's been very, very fun to interact with the government on these issues. So I want to talk about my startup, why I started Quantenna. I want to be a billionaire, so freaking bad. Okay, so that's not why I started Quantenna. It was not to make money, because remember, I worked in a defense communications startup in the 80s, and that was a very difficult time in Silicon Valley. And I realized most startups fail. So if you do a startup to make money, you're probably going to fail. And then you'll look back and think that it was a failure. The reason I did a startup, of course, it's important to make money in a startup because that's the metric of success. But the main reason I did a startup was to build something, again, based on my research. So remember, I was in Silicon Valley in the late 80s. I didn't know enough to build the wireless systems that I wanted to build. So I spent 20 years doing lots of theory about wireless communication. And I wanted to see, does theory matter? And it did. Quantenna built the world's highest performing Wi-Fi chipset. And it was based on the theory that me and my students and my postdocs and my collaborators had built over those 20 years. So it was incredibly gratifying to see that what we all do in the university actually matters in practice. And there was no way I could have known that in quite the same way had I not left the university and gone into industry to use the research that we had done. So it wasn't surprising that taking the theory from the university into practice was very gratifying about the research that I'd done. What I didn't expect is when I went back to the university after realizing how important the research is to build practical techniques, was how much the knowledge of going into industry and building products would change my research directions when I went back to the university and change my teaching. Because when you explain to a student something in a book, it's just something in a book. When you explain to a student that this equation actually made it into this chip that was the highest performing Wi-Fi chipset in the world, it means something different to the students. And so it really changed the way I taught, having had that experience of working in the startup. Startups are a wild ride. This picture on the left is March 2006, when we got our seed funding for the company. And 10 years later, we went public. So that was a very exciting day. But along the way, over that 10 years, there were many really bad days. Some of the worst days in my profession were in the startup. There were challenges with my co-founder. We almost ran out of money many times. We were responsible for the hundreds of employees that joined the company. So if the company was not successful, I could go back to the university, but they could not. So it was a wild ride, very enjoyable, but not for everyone. So you might say, okay, I said academia is great. Startups are a wild ride. Why did I become an engineering dean, which is what I've been doing the last 4 years? It was really to have an impact beyond what I could do in my research group and in my field of wireless communication. As a dean, I can impact the entire School of Engineering and perhaps be a role model for other engineering schools, what the future of engineering might look like. So I became a dean to help create new engineering knowledge and technologies and show how that technology could benefit humanity, how we should use technology for good, because technology can be used in many different ways. So that was one of the reasons. I also thought it was important to educate tomorrow's technologists and engineers and leaders. Engineering is such an important field that the leaders of tomorrow are going to be the students in engineering today. And I wanted to play a role in figuring out how do we educate those leaders. I care about diversity and inclusion, so that was an important element of becoming an engineering dean. And you will see in Princeton, we've actually implemented many programs to increase the diversity and inclusion of our students. So when I think about what it was that I set out to do at Princeton 4 years ago, it was to grow the School of Engineering, to leverage the fact that engineering sits within a great liberal arts university. Princeton's a great university. It's well known as a great liberal arts university. It's not a great, outstanding engineering school, because engineering in the Ivy League schools in the United States has always been kind of a second-class citizen. So to me, the challenge was, how do we take engineering up to a different level while leveraging being in a great liberal arts university? We launched new interdisciplinary programs in artificial intelligence and bioengineering, quantum computing, robotics, and blockchain technologies. These are the areas of engineering that I think are poised to have significant impact in the decades to come, and they're still in their very early days of impact. I wanted to make Princeton a catalyst for innovation and entrepreneurship so that our faculty could have the same experience I did as an entrepreneur, if they wanted to, if they aspired to be entrepreneurs, making it easier. Stanford and Silicon Valley is the poster child for innovation and entrepreneurship coming out of universities. Princeton, not so much. So how do we make it easier for our faculty to start companies or to take their ideas and put them into practice? And then, of course, I wanted to enhance diversity and inclusion in the school. Overarching goal for my deanship was to positively impact the university, other universities, the profession, and the high-tech industry. So it's still a work in progress. I've only been there 4 years, but we've made a lot of progress, and I won't go through all the progress, but we've grown the School of Engineering. We launched all these new activities. We've actually created an AI hub with the Governor's Office of New Jersey, and we've significantly increased the diversity of our faculty and students. In fact, I'm very proud to say that Princeton Engineering now has 41% women students, which is way above the national average of around 25%. And I'm happy to talk to the university leaders about how it was that we were able to bring so many women into studying engineering and staying in the engineering majors. So what is my leadership philosophy after doing leadership in the university and in startups and as a dean? The most important thing, in my view, for a leader is to make individuals successful, make your faculty and your students successful. That's the role of any academic leader. It's not about us. It's not about us as leaders. It's about enabling everyone else to be successful. It's important to have a vision, to be ambitious, to say, where can we go that we haven't been before? To be optimistic, to pick great leaders below you and empower them so that they can also lead. An individual leader can only do so much. If you surround yourself with great leaders, you can do so much more. To be a good listener, to collaborate, to be open and transparent where you share your ideas and challenges with others so that you can learn from them and that people know why you're making the decisions that you're making. You have to be decisive. You have to be able to make a decision, even if it's not clear what decision to make. And many of you may know that there's a lot of challenges in U.S. universities right now. And it's not easy to make decisions about how to handle all of the strife, but you have to be decisive, but then be willing to realize when you make a mistake. And then you have to assume everyone has the best intentions. Now, this is very easy to say, but what are the challenges? It's hard to be bold, especially in conservative universities. I'm in a conservative university at Princeton. How do you be bold but not make so many changes that you break things apart? People are the hardest things, especially difficult people. The easy people are easy. Anyone who's an academic leader knows that it's the difficult people that are the hardest challenge. And yet you have to be good at dealing with difficult people. Conditions can be difficult. You may not control them. There may be economic issues that you don't control. There may be environmental issues, flooding, things going astray. You have to be able to deal with difficult conditions. And I would say that my startups helped me with that a lot because I was accustomed to dealing with things that I didn't expect. Ossified organizational structures, again, in universities that have structures going back decades, it's hard to bring about change. The IEEE was the most ossified structure I ever dealt with. I didn't think there was any way that we could actually change the IEEE for the better. But we did, by being persuasive and having a sense of humor and being persistent until we were able to bring about change. And cultural change is the hardest thing. As people in Europe know, there's many old cultures in Europe, and yet in order to advance, we really do need to bring about cultural change. Okay, so what's my connection to Malaga? Juan talked about it a little bit, but I'm going to tell my side of the story. So it was November 2004, thereabouts. It was winter. I was sitting in my Stanford office, and it was pouring raining, kind of like this morning. I was working on my wireless textbook, the first edition, and I was miserable. It was a very long way from being complete. So there I was in my office, watching the rain outside because I was miserable and I didn't want to work on my book, but I knew I had to work on the book. And an email arrives from Professor Juan Romero Jerez in very formal English, which was probably translated from the Spanish. Dear esteemed professor, nobody talks that way to professors in the United States. Graciously asking if he could spend a sabbatical at Stanford. Now, I have no idea who Juan Romero Jerez is. I don't even know where Malaga is, okay? So I quickly look it up. It's in the Costa del Sol. It's pouring raining outside my window. I'm miserable. And I start dreaming about Costa del Sol. So I write back immediately, which I never do. I would love to come visit you. I would love to host you to visit Stanford if it's reciprocal. Has to be reciprocal. So Juan Romero Jerez writes back right away, of course, we would love to host you. You can give a couple talks. We could even pay for you to come for a week. And I said, I'm not coming for a week. I'm coming for a month. So I arrived on my birthday, July 4th, 2005, with my family. It was the best birthday. Juan shows up with a cake baked by his lovely wife, Petra, a chocolate cake. How did he know it was my birthday? I never told him it was my birthday. He had my passport, so he looked it up. That's one. During that month, I learned about the important research going on in Malaga, a university I'd never heard of. It was amazing to go around and talk to all the professors and hear about the research they were doing because it was really important research, really interesting research. I was fascinated. And I asked them, how come you're not publishing your work in prestigious journals? Many of the professors didn't believe it was good enough to publish in prestigious journals. Or they weren't sure how to write an abstract, because that's really important when you're trying to publish in prestigious journals, because a lot of the reviewers, they don't read past the abstract. So you got to get the abstract right. So I spent the month talking to the researchers and telling them, you need to publish this, and let me help you write an abstract so that it gets published. That was the month I spent in Malaga. And not only did I learn about the research and establish some wonderful collaborations, I took Spanish classes at the University of Malaga. I enjoyed espetos, Spanish wine, and this magical city, which I really fell in love with that month that I was here. So this created a lifelong collaboration and many friendships. I'm going to go very quickly through a little bit about wireless communication because that is also my connection to Malaga and to my collaborators in Malaga. It's all around the research that we did together. So, and I won't take too long talking about this, but I just want to give you a flavor at why wireless communication is so interesting and exciting to me still. I guess 1982 is when I started studying wireless, or 1986, so it's been 40 years, almost 40 years that I've been working in this field, and I still think it's the most exciting field ever. Because there's so much we can do with wireless communication beyond what we can do today. Today, we're mostly using our devices to communicate with each other or to download data from the internet. 10, 20 years from now, we'll have automated cars. We'll have sensors inside and around our bodies so that we don't need to go to doctors so often, because doctors will know through this wireless network if we're about to have a heart attack, or if we need to get a checkup, or if our blood pressure has gone up. We'll have sensors in buildings and in the ground and around the environment to help track flooding, to help track fires. There's so many things we can't even imagine that we're going to be able to do with wireless networks. It will help older people live independently longer. We'll have robots to clean our house. I hate cleaning my house, so if a robot can clean my house, that would be a fantastic application. So there's many exciting things happening in wireless even today. It's still the field that I love and that I find most exciting. There's interesting challenges because the data rates that we use every day in our devices have gone up exponentially, and yet the spectrum is very limited. We have Wi-Fi to help alleviate some of the challenges in the licensed spectrum. There's higher frequencies that we can use, but the laws of physics apply there that make it difficult to use millimeter wave and terahertz. And I did a little bit of work on molecular communication a long time ago, using molecules to send bits, which was one of the funnest things I did. You don't use electromagnetic waves, you use diffusion, but it was still a lot of fun. So the promise of 5G, which we have today, is that we're going to be able to get very high data rates, very low latency, we can send the data instantaneously, and our devices will live 10 years on a battery. So that was the promise of 5G. Simultaneously, high data rates, low energy consumption, and low latency. We don't have that in our phones today. That was the promise. And I love this quote from Jonathan Swift, which is that promises and pie crusts are made to be broken. And that's especially true of wireless networking, because then it gives us the inspiration to look at the next G and get people to buy more phones if we can actually meet some of these promises. So there's exciting enabling technologies for this next generation of networks. We could completely rethink the way that we do cellular system design, including using cloud-based RAN to monitor and control the networks. There's massive MIMO, which is very exciting. It's a technology that went into Quantenna's first chip, although we only had 4 antennas then, and now we can have a lot more. But it really solves a lot of the challenges of wireless propagation and creates other challenges. And then there's also things we can do in the cloud to optimize these networks. And then there's artificial intelligence. People have heard of that, right? AI, machine learning. Can't that solve everything? Why do we need to do work on anything? Communications, law, computer science, science. Just throw everything at an artificial intelligence black box. That will solve everything. No. So machine learning is a bandwagon. There's a lot of hype around it. So should we jump on? Should we embrace machine learning to do all of the research in all of these different areas? Or should we run away screaming? So I'm generally not a bandwagon kind of person. When there's something that everybody's working in, I tend to run away screaming and work on something else, because it's a lot easier to publish if nobody is working in the field versus hundreds or thousands of people. But I had a postdoc, Nariman Farsad, who was doing this molecular communications. And he came to work with me and he said, this isn't an electromagnetic wave channel. We don't have good mathematical models for it. Why don't we try machine learning and see if that can equalize the channel? Because molecular communication are channels with very long memories. So we did that, and we actually beat theory. So we built an equalizer using a machine learning algorithm, and we did better than the Viterbi algorithm, which is the theoretically optimal technique. Now, you might say, you can't beat the theoretically optimal technique. That's true in theory, but not in practice. So in practice, we didn't have all the parameters of the channel that we were trying to equalize with the Viterbi algorithm, and it turns out that machine learning did better. So when you don't have a good model, or you don't have all the parameters of a model, machine learning can actually do better. And we proved that. for equalization, and for encoding and decoding, and for compression of voice and images. Now, there's other ways that we can apply machine learning to do approximate solutions to intractable problems. If you don't have a mathematical solution, it might be worth trying machine learning and seeing what you get. Maybe it'll work, maybe not. There's breakthroughs in security and privacy and resilience that you can get from machine learning because it can anticipate things based on large amounts of data, which again, you can't do with mathematical models. And it may provide breakthroughs through other areas of design, like cross-layer design. So I did jump on the bandwagon. Juan mentioned my last book, which was on machine learning and wireless communication. So even though I'm cautiously optimistic that machine learning is a great tool, I do think we need to be cautious because it won't solve all problems. And this is just a picture of a machine learning-based receiver where in the receiver, we don't have the mathematical model. This is the only slide I have with math. Apologies for that. But we didn't know the analog channel H of F there. And so we actually applied machine learning to do the end-to-end equalization, and then we refined it to just learn the parameters of the channel, and we did just as well as Viterbi decoding with perfect channel information. So this is just one example of where machine learning can beat theory when you don't have perfect models or perfect information about your models. I talked a little bit about rethinking cellular system design. I think that cellular systems were actually designed in the 1940s. The first paper on cellular system design was by D.H. Ring in 1948. And interestingly, even though the technology has evolved tremendously, we haven't really changed the way we think about cellular system design, the system design. But that's starting to change. We've introduced a lot of different technologies. I think the place where the most change remains is thinking about the cloud. How do we use the cloud to control the networks, to optimize the networks, to dynamically change them? And this is an area, you could call it Cloud RAN, or you could just say cloud-enabled wireless, where we're really in the very early stages of designing cellular networks to take advantage of what we can do in the cloud, including machine learning at the edge of the network. So putting machine learning in our devices. And by the way, I also think machine learning in our cell phones may be a driver for tremendous profits by the cellular companies in the next generation of wireless. Because most people don't want to pay more for their cellular systems today, but if you could actually do machine learning in a compelling way on your phone, you might be willing to pay more. So I think that this cloud-enabled wireless is going to be critical for the next generation of applications, whether it's self-driving cars or in-body communications or smart cities or virtual reality or whatever emerges as the killer application. And then there's also a need to develop wireless networks that are much more resilient. A lot of my work with my friends and colleagues at Malaga was on the wireless channel, the fact that the link fails or it changes randomly. We didn't look at things like malicious agents that can attack the network by injecting data into the network, or jammers, people that are intentionally jamming your signal so that you can't get the signal, which is a real problem if you're doing automated driving or remote surgery over a wireless network. And we certainly never thought about grid failures. So when you think about environmental changes and how the environment is causing entire electrical grids to collapse, how do we build wireless networks that are resilient in those scenarios? So some of the work that I'm doing today, even as a dean, I still do research. That's my first love. I will never give it up, is working on some of these areas. I think a killer app for 6G is to connect the next billion. There's no question, if you think about what happened during COVID, the people that had high-speed connectivity could continue to work, to socialize, to advance their lives. People that were not connected during the pandemic with high-speed connectivity were left behind. We need to fix that with the next generation of cellular technology and Wi-Fi, and we can fix it. It's not a technological problem. It's a matter of willpower of governments to invest the money to connect all these people. It is a new era for innovation. In the United States, the CHIPS and Science Act, which was passed 2 years ago, because I'm a PCAST member and I worked on the report on the semiconductor ecosystem, I was at the signing of the CHIPS and Science Act, and it was one of the most exciting moments in US technology history for decades. $30 billion invested not in software, but in hardware, in microelectronics, in the innovations that we need to advance the state of the art in all technologies are going to be in hardware. So I'm very excited to play a role in that, sitting on the board of Intel, also in my role as an academic. How do we create the next generation of semiconductors and electronic systems that will bring down energy costs and enable all the exciting technologies that we see in the future? So I'm going to summarize here, and then I'm just going to end by talking about women in engineering and then a few words. So it's an exciting time to be in wireless. We have many challenges to support the next generation of wireless technology, and we need advances in electronics and systems. So the last thing I'm going to talk about in the slides before I switch to a few personal words is women in engineering. And when I think about, are things better now than when I was in college in the early 80s? Well, the average women in engineering is 21%. That's not critical mass. Women are 50% of the population. So why is it there's only 21% women studying engineering? When I was an undergrad, it was 7-8%. So we're doing better, but we're still not where I thought we would be back in the early 80s. I thought that by now we'd be at 50% or close to it. And only 14% in electrical engineering, my field. That's one of the lowest percentages of women in engineering. In academia, 20% of the engineering faculty are women. Again, not a critical mass. That means there's many women students that never see a woman professor in their whole undergraduate experience. So they don't have role models and mentors that are women. In industry, only 13% of the engineering workforce is women. By the way, these are statistics in the United States. It may be different in Spain. What makes me most sad about every statistic on this page is that more than half of the women that go into the technology industry leave, more than half. So they get through their undergraduate education, maybe their graduate education, they go into industry, they have such a bad experience that they leave technology altogether. Only 13% of patent holders are women, and startups receive less than 2% of the VC funding if they're women-led startups. When I was pitching Quantenna, I pitched every single VC on Sand Hill Road, dozens and dozens and dozens of presentations. The only other women in the room were serving coffee. There were no women VCs, and there were no other women founders. So why does this matter? Why do we care about this data? Diversity is important in engineering because it's about success. It's documented that diverse organizations are more creative, perform better, and have higher satisfaction of their members. The profession struggles to attract and retain diverse people that bring this diversity of ideas to the profession. The engineering profession doesn't provide the same benefits to its women or minority engineers. And we have to make things better for the next generation. I have a daughter who's a mechanical engineer. And when she started college a few years ago in mechanical engineering, she came home and she told me, "Mom, now I know why you spend so much time focused on increasing diversity in engineering. Because my professors and my fellow students don't think I belong in engineering." And this was just a few years ago. So we need to make it better. We need to make all these diverse engineers feel like they belong. We need them. The profession needs them. So women don't have a good experience. This has been documented. I won't go through all the details of this. Sexual harassment is not just about physical assault. It's about women not being promoted or not being given the same opportunities as men, or being asked to do demeaning tasks like take notes in a meeting where everybody else is a man, not being trusted. This has all been well documented. It's sad, but I'm an optimist and we can do better. So I've spent a lot of time working on raising awareness about why diversity is important, both in academia and industry and in my professional society, to raise awareness about implicit bias. Why does my daughter feel like she doesn't belong in engineering? It's not because anyone told her that. It's how she felt. It's how she was treated. And that's what we need to do better, raise awareness about implicit bias. And we need to figure out what works to promote diverse engineers and make sure that everyone in the profession can achieve their full potential. So much work is needed to make the road ahead for the next generation of diverse engineers better, easier. We need to collect statistics to see where we are and how we can do better, raise awareness, and recruit advocates. The women are the minority in engineering, so we need the guys, we need all of you to help promote diversity in the profession. And this needs to happen in companies, professional organizations, universities, everywhere. So with that, ahora voy a cambiar a español para decir algunas palabras de agradecimiento por este honor y evento tan especial. Me siento muy honrada de recibir este prestigioso honoris causa de esta gran universidad y esta ciudad mágica. Me siento particularmente honrada de ser la segunda receptora de un honoris causa en la historia de la universidad. Este honor significa mucho para mí, dada mi conexión especial con la Universidad de Málaga durante las últimas 2 décadas. Como escucharon antes, el mensaje electrónico de Juan Romero de hace mucho tiempo inició nuestra larga colaboración y colaboraciones con varios otros profesores malagueños, que resultaron en algunas de mis investigaciones más impactantes. También creo amistades valiosas y me presentó las maravillas de esta ciudad especial, que me infunde alegría en cada visita. Estoy encantada de ver que la universidad prospera, así como el parque tecnológico. Considero que este honoris causa no es solo un honor, sino también una obligación para mí de hacer todo lo posible para ayudar a la universidad y a la ciudad a alcanzar niveles aún mayores de excelencia y impacto. Si bien el éxito profesional es ciertamente gratificante, para mí el verdadero significado del éxito incluye las relaciones invaluables que he construido en mi vida personal y profesional. El placer y el honor de trabajar con mis brillantes y apasionados estudiantes postdoctorados y colegas me ha dado mucho más alegría profesional que cualquier premio o honor que haya recibido. Y esos premios y honores son el fruto de su arduo trabajo, además del mío. Algunos de mis amistades más cercanas se han formado a través de mis relaciones profesionales y esas amistades han hecho que mi carrera sea mucho más enriquecida y divertida, y especialmente mis amigos de Málaga. Lo más gratificante para mí son las relaciones personales que hacen que valga la pena vivir. Estoy agradecida a mis amigos de todo el mundo y mi familia extendida a los Estados Unidos, México y Israel, que traen tanto amor y alegría a mi vida. Mi esposo Arturo, que está aquí presente, es el amor de mi vida y el mayor animador y apoyo en todos mis esfuerzos. Mis hijos, Daniel y Nicole, que han visto, llenan mi corazón de alegría y lo amo más que el infinito. Aunque sé que eso no es matemáticamente posible, yo lo sé. Todo es posible en el amor de nuestros hijos. Para terminar, quiero agradecerles una vez más a todos ustedes este honoris causa y esta ceremonia especial. Haré todo lo que esté en mi mano para devolver a la universidad y la ciudad de Málaga el haberme concedido este prestigioso y profundamente significado honor. Gracias.
Estimadas autoridades civiles y de las Fuerzas de Seguridad del Estado, autoridades académicas, compañeros de la Universidad de Málaga, queridos estudiantes, señoras y señores. Es un honor darles la bienvenida al Paraninfo de la Universidad de Málaga. Siguiendo nuestra tradición, nos reunimos en este solemne acto, reflejo de un ceremonial que permanece casi inalterado desde los inicios de las universidades en el siglo XI. Para mí, como rector, es un privilegio presidir esta ceremonia en la que nuestra universidad rinde homenaje a la trayectoria académica, científica y humana de la profesora Andrea Goldsmith, a quien hoy investimos como Doctora Honoris Causa. Este título representa la máxima distinción que otorgamos a quienes, con su dedicación y logro, han marcado el avance del conocimiento y el progreso social, mejorando la vida de la ciudadanía. Nos congregamos hoy aquí para reconocer a la doctora Goldsmith, figura de referencia mundial en el campo de la ingeniería de comunicaciones móviles, una pionera cuyas innovaciones han transformado la vida de miles de millones de personas en todo el mundo. Su capacidad para combinar excelencia científica con una visión profundamente innovadora ha dejado una huella indeleble en el desarrollo de tecnologías que hoy forman parte esencial de nuestra vida diaria. Sus cerca de 30 patentes son un testimonio claro de su incansable búsqueda de soluciones tecnológicas avanzadas. Hoy no solo celebramos a una científica excepcional, sino también a una mujer que ha desafiado y triunfado en un ámbito históricamente dominado por los hombres. La profesora Goldsmith ha roto techos de cristal a lo largo de su carrera, demostrando que la perseverancia, la dedicación y el talento pueden abrir nuevos caminos para las mujeres en la ciencia y en la ingeniería. El hecho de que se haya convertido en la primera mujer en recibir el prestigioso premio Marconi es una muestra de su capacidad excepcional y su firme compromiso con la inclusión. Más allá de sus logros técnicos, ha sido una voz influyente en la creación de un entorno profesional más inclusivo y ha hecho de la igualdad de oportunidades una prioridad, creando espacios y oportunidades para que las mujeres puedan desarrollarse en el mundo de la ingeniería. Como ella misma ha señalado en más de una ocasión, fue clave para su desarrollo profesional el haber conocido durante sus primeros años universitarios a una mujer profesora de álgebra que se convirtió en su amiga y en su mentora. En un mundo donde las figuras femeninas en la ingeniería eran escasas, esa referencia fue determinante en su decisión de seguir adelante. Pero hoy también celebramos a Andrea Goldsmith como una persona cercana a Málaga. Su relación con nuestra ciudad y nuestra universidad es profunda, habiendo incluso cursado un programa de español para extranjeros aquí, en la Universidad de Málaga. Yo creo que eso se ha hecho evidente. Andrea comparte no solo su pasión por la tecnología, sino también por los valores que identifican a los malagueños, el gusto por la vida, la gastronomía, el vino, el calor humano. Como ella misma ha demostrado, estas cualidades no están en absoluto reñidas con la excelencia profesional y el trabajo duro, sino que se complementan perfectamente. Además de su brillante carrera académica, la profesora Goldsmith es una líder multifacética, fundadora de compañías tecnológicas como Plum Wifi o Quantenna, que ha salido aquí ya referida, lo que refleja su compromiso con la innovación y su habilidad para llevar el conocimiento desde la teoría a la práctica. Su liderazgo en la Escuela de Ingeniería y Ciencias Aplicadas de la Universidad de Princeton, así como su pertenencia a prestigiosas academias como la Academia Nacional de Ingeniería de Estados Unidos y la Real Academia de Ingeniería del Reino Unido, confirman su enorme relevancia y el respeto que inspira en la comunidad científica internacional. Más allá de su carrera científica, la profesora Goldsmith ha sido una defensora incansable de la diversidad y la inclusión. Consciente de la falta de representación femenina en su campo, ha dedicado tiempo y recursos a promover la participación de mujeres y otros grupos subrepresentados en el ámbito tecnológico. Ha destinado generosos premios, como precisamente el Premio Marconi, a iniciativas que fomentan la diversidad y la ingeniería y luchan contra la brecha digital. Su legado, por tanto, no es solo tecnológico, sino también social, abogando por un entorno inclusivo donde personas de cualquier género o procedencia tengan la oportunidad de prosperar. Con esta investidura, la Universidad de Málaga no solo rinde homenaje a su talento excepcional, sino también a sus valores humanos y su compromiso con el conocimiento al servicio de la sociedad. Andrea Goldsmith se suma a la lista de doctores honoris causa de nuestra institución, que en sus 51 años de historia ha distinguido a cerca de 60 personas, de las cuales muy pocas han sido mujeres. A partir de hoy, querida Andrea, te unes a nombres ilustres como Marjorie Hutchinson, María Zambrano, Margarita Salas, María Victoria Tencia, Kazuyo Sajima, María Emilia Casas, Pilar Paloma, entre otras. Como ellas, eres un ejemplo e inspiración para las estudiantes y todos los miembros de esta universidad, que a partir de ahora es también la tuya. Querida Andrea, a partir de este momento te incorporas al claustro de doctores de nuestra querida institución, una comunidad comprometida con el conocimiento, la innovación, la igualdad de oportunidades y el progreso social. Defendemos lo público como garantía de que cualquier persona, sin importar su situación económica, pueda desarrollarse y contribuir a la sociedad. Estamos convencidos de que tu ejemplo seguirá inspirando a las futuras generaciones de estudiantes y profesionales. No quiero terminar sin agradecerte por aceptar este reconocimiento y expresar mi más gran agradecimiento a la Escuela Técnica Superior de Ingeniería de Telecomunicación y en especial al profesor Romero, que ha sido o ha actuado como padrino, y a su director, el profesor Godoy, mi querido Fali, por su acertada propuesta. Nos sentimos profundamente honrados y creo que hablo en nombre no solo de la comunidad universitaria, sino de toda Málaga, al contar con tu presencia y tu legado académico y humano. Te damos la más calurosa bienvenida. Sin duda, Andrea, la Universidad de Málaga es una gran universidad y nuestra Escuela de Telecomunicación es una de las mejores escuelas de Europa, pero desde hoy somos un poco mejor porque ya formas parte de nosotros. Muchísimas gracias. Se levanta la sesión.